Thanks, Elaine. And Brendan, thanks for talking to us on Midday. We got an absolutely huge response to this last week. And I think it's because it's a very grey area, isn't it? And people don't know if they can take a case or even know what they should be doing if they're experiencing bullying in the workplace. It
certainly is, Sybil. And I think what it's important to say that bullying is a huge issue for people when it happens in their lives. People spend more time at work than they do doing anything else. So when they are being bullied, first of all, they may feel vulnerable, they may feel weak. Who do they talk to? Who do they go to? And it's a huge issue in this country. And I don't know whether it's part of the whole culture of climbing up the corporate ladder. But certainly people who are in any way perceived to be weak or vulnerable can be very often the victims of bullying. And it can have huge impact on their lives, their self-esteem, how they feel about themselves, and indeed even impact on their personal lives.
Is there a statutory definition of bullying in Ireland?
No, and it's an issue that very often is commented on. I see when SIPTO issued a report, there was a comment about there being no statutory definition. There is a definition within a code of conduct that has been endorsed by the Supreme Court, which effectively, and it's important for people to understand, the bullying must be repeated inappropriate behaviour, and the test really is whether that behaviour is likely to be regarded as undermining the employee's dignity at work. I think the important point to make is that the behaviour that is alleged must be unwelcome. Now, the reason I make that point is that it's very important that if you feel you're being bullied, you need to address that with the person who you feel is bullying, because they may not actually realise it's unwelcome. It might be jokes, it might be comments, it might be emails that is a concern or an affront to the person who is receiving them. But the person may feel it's just part of general workplace banter.
So you're suggesting, as a solicitor, go to the person first before you take it any further?
Yeah, and now sometimes that can be difficult, and then we feel, I can't go to that person, I feel intimidated. And if that is the case, then confide on a confidential basis with another colleague and maybe ask them to go to the person and say, look, Mary or John, it could be male or female, has asked me to confide. They don't appreciate those emails or whatever, and ask them to stop. Hopefully that will be the end of it. Now, if it's not the end of it, then obviously there is a need to then very often escalate the complaint. And what I would say to employees who find themselves in that very difficult situation is that ultimately, if it ends up in a tribunal or whatever, it's very often a case of who said what or who did what. So document everything, even to the point of, if you've already said to the employee who you feel is not going to react positively, send them an email and say, I referred to our conversation earlier, and I just want you to let you know that I feel offended by the email or the joke or whatever the case may be, and I'd ask you to stop that behaviour. And that build-up of documentation can be very important in a later stage. Exactly.
Okay, let's say you go to HR. We've had a lot of texts in from people saying, I was bullied within a big global organisation, went to HR and ended up realising that HR have management's interest at heart and not my own. A lot of people were saying that HR weren't on their side.
Yeah, and everybody has their own story, and no doubt HR managers throughout the country would of course be protesting differently. But if particularly the complaint is against a higher tier of management, it puts HR in a difficult position, and employees also have a perception that HR is not their friend. Ultimately, the duty of an employer is to make sure that they have a safe system of work. They should have not alone a code, but they should have policies and procedures to deal with any complaints. The employer's obligation is to follow those procedures and put in place an appropriate investigation, make sure it's impartial, make sure both sides get heard, because there are situations where people may make a complaint and it's not justified, and follow through the process.
Okay, if you're getting no joy with HR, can you take a case to, the Equality Tribunal or the...
Well, if it's harassment, you can go to the Equality Tribunal. If it's bullying, then there's a number of things you can do. You can bring a claim, which can be very difficult to prove, for constructive dismissal, where you say, I had to resign my job because the contract was effectively fundamentally broken by the employer not dealing with it. Or you can bring a personal injury claim if you've got some level of psychological injury as a result of the behaviour by the employer. I suppose the message I would like to send out, these are actions that nobody would want to take on. They're highly risky. They can involve obviously a lot of financial risk for people, so try and deal with it as early in the process as possible and try and get it to stop. Even sometimes mediation may work if there's goodwill and good faith on both sides.
Finally, do you have many cases coming up in the courts at the moment?
Well, I've had several cases actually in recent times. Thankfully, we managed to resolve them without actually them having to be heard in court, because as I said earlier, it's a huge risk for clients. If they go to court and they lose the case, they could be facing costs of €100,000. Now, talk about adding injury to already open wounds. That's a massive impact on their lives.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, and on that note, many thanks for giving us that advice on Midday today. Hopefully it's helped some of our viewers, and it's back to you in studio, Elaine.